one of our own tell us what they've been up to. Laura has been at UVM in different capacities. She got her PhD in the biology department and then joined plant biology as a lecturer and later a senior lecturer. She joined in 2009, so she's been here for 12 years now, imagine. She is an award-winning teacher who students flock to for the classes, and she spent her sabbatical last year thinking about teaching, and she's going to talk to us today about contemplative teaching in higher ed. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh, actually, announcement, no seminar next week because of the Blackboard Jungle Symposium. So, but with that, I will turn it over to Laura.
Hi, welcome everybody. It's nice to see Tom Hudspeth there. Hi, Tom. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for spending this hour with me. And thank you, Dawn, for the introduction. Yeah, it has been 12 years. It's sort of amazing to think that, but it's true. So what I'd love to do for the next hour or so is to take you on a bit of a journey with us, with me, around contemplative teaching and learning in higher education, what that is, why should we use it, and I have both theory and practice here. So I will provide you with some context into the contemplative pedagogy, but I also would like to invite some practice in as well. So bear with me if you're new to all this stuff, and hopefully I'll guide you along with an invitation to practice. So my name is Laura Hill, and again, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to present a Marvin seminar again. It's been at least 10 years since I've presented in the Marvin seminar series, so it's really wonderful to be back. All right, so what I'd like to do to begin is actually quote Parker Palmer, who's the founder of the the Center for Courage and Renewal. And he's also a world-renowned writer and speaker, and he focuses on issues in education, but also issues around community leadership and social change. And I highly recommend his really wonderful book called The Courage to Teach. So Parker says that the heart of contemplation is the same quality that is at the heart of all great scholarship. And this is profound attentiveness to the phenomenon that one is trying to understand. So with this idea of contemplation, it really is just getting into a deeply thoughtful place. And I have the plant that I studied for part of my doctoral dissertation. I spent 8 years with this plant in the background. Its common name is Appalachian Jacob's Ladder, and its Latin name is Pelarmonium vanbruntiae. So I became steeped in this contemplative space as I really had to sit very quietly, take very tedious measurements with black flies biting my ears, moving pollen with a paintbrush from one flower to another. But alongside of that field work, I also developed this deep intellectual inquiry into this rare plant. It's a globally threatened species that occurs in rare small populations, mostly in the Green Mountain National Forest. So this stillness and this quiet that's necessary for thoughts to develop, for creativity to come through, has really been thought of lately as being non-productive and really a waste of time or a squandering of resources in the academy. And if faculty take that on, then students never learn that they can really stand in the gap, in the pause of their experience, and take that time to consider. So we lose our ability to attend mindfully. And when I use that word mindfully, I'm talking about, bringing yourself into the present moment. So not dwelling in the past, not thinking about the future, just being fully present with what's happening right now in a way that's non-judgmental, which is the hardest part. but we lose our ability to attend mindfully and to reflect and to just sort of wonder about it all. And the results and costs of this are really profound, both for the individual, but also for the world that we inhabit. So what I'd like to do now is to invite you to participate if you would like to. This is optional, but I would like to invite you to participate in an arrival activity, a mindfulness-based arrival activity that I do to begin each of my classes. So part of this contemplative practice is the practice. So I'd like to invite you to do that for the next few minutes. So all you really need to do is just follow my guide, and everything that I say is simply an invitation to participate. It's not something that you need to do. You can do something different. So again, everything is simply an invitation to participate. So I invite you to situate yourself in a way that's potentially a little bit more comfortable than the way that you're sitting right now. I'm going to do the same. So just shift your seat. Make any adjustments that you need to feel a little more settled or a little more comfortable. And you can lay down, you take any position you'd like. So do what feels good for you. And once you've found a space that feels a little more supportive, I apologize. I'm getting a distraction right now, right out of my window. Hopefully there won't be a lot of noise. Okay, so once you've found a space that supports you and your physical posture, then I encourage you to just take 3 big breaths, in through the nose and out through the mouth. It doesn't have to be quick, but just take a deep breath in and out through the mouth. Just do that a couple more times. And feel free to make a sound. We often don't make sounds. It feels good to make a sound, so do what feels good. Check in to see if there's any tension that could be released, maybe in your jaw. And then take your hands, if you'd like, and just place them somewhere on your body that feels good, like the top of your lap, or you can place your hands on your belly. Put one hand on your belly, one hand on your chest. Anything that feels comforting and relaxing to you. And then I invite you, if you feel safe doing so, to let your eyes close. And if you'd rather not, you can just fix your gaze on something that's in front of you and slightly down. So like I'm looking at the trackpad on my laptop right now. And what this does is it minimizes the visual stimulation, which just we're bombarded by every second of every day. And just try to tune in to your natural breath. Feel the breath as it comes into your body and as it leaves your body. Maybe notice the belly expand on the inhale and contract slightly on the exhale. See if you can focus all of your attention for the next moment on your breath as it comes in and as it goes out. And notice any discomfort, notice any resistance, and just open yourself to the experience, whatever it is. See if you can open yourself to whatever's going on right now. And just notice how the air feels cooler as it enters your nose, and a warmer and moister air exits on the exhale. Now see if you can match the length of the inhale with the length of the exhale. See if you can inhale and exhale at the same rate. And this is called samavriti in Sanskrit. This is translates to same breath. So the match, the inhale length matches the exhale. Samavriti is one of the many types of breath control that comes through the yoga tradition, or pranayama. Yama means control, prana referring to the breath. And the texts of yoga are ancient. The Vedas are the ancient scripts written about 1500 BC. And the last Vedas is the last chapter is called the Upanishads. And the sage Patanjali wrote the last chapter, the Upanishad. And in this last chapter of the Vedas, Patanjali gives us a path to attain yoga. And this is known as the 8-limbed path. And one of the limbs of this path is pranayama, is this breath control. So take one more complete breath, meaning one more full inhale and full exhale. And if your eyes are closed, you can open them back up. And if your gaze is lowered, lift the gaze and attend back to this talk. And thank you for participating if you chose to do so. And I'd like to gauge the room virtually to see how you would respond to that. So the first is, I chose not to participate. The second was, you just wasted 5 minutes of my day. The third is just a neutral feeling, neither good nor bad. And then I appreciate you maybe appreciated the respite, but didn't feel like you gained anything significant from that. And then the last is that you gained some important benefits or potentially insights into yourself or the world. So just cast your virtual vote in your mind. What was your experience? And I'd like to show you some data from my class. So I teach in the Biological Sciences program. I'm currently teaching B Core 12, which is the second semester of Exploring Biology. And I start class like this every day, or every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And about 5 or 6 weeks in, I gave my students a poll and I gave them a week to respond. And this is how they responded. So sort of surprisingly, most of the students were gaining some important benefits and insights into themselves and into the world. So the majority of students are gaining some benefits. So I truncated the last 2 columns there. 14% were neutral. 1 is just choosing not to participate. And 2 out of 37 had, didn't feel so great about it. Didn't feel like I was using the class time well. So here's just a small sample distribution from my class, but one thing that I would like to quote is Susan Bergaff, who in her 2011 paper said that a class that begins with a few minutes of silence and then does not connect this experience to the subsequent lecture and discussion is not, in our view, contemplative pedagogy. And I agree. I agree with her. So what we just did was just a simple arrival activity. I wanted to share with you to give you a sense of what I do in my classes and how the students are responding to this. So if that's not contemplative pedagogy, what is? One thing that I find very useful in my teaching is just understanding my students. So I ask them directly to share their experience, but I also like to just understand their generation. So we're no longer teaching millennials. We're mostly teaching Gen Z. So, and again, this is just sort of the traditional age college student. I have post-bacs in my class that don't fit into this, but most of the students in this first year introductory biology course are of Generation Z, so born after 1996. So they're the most racially and ethnically diverse generation that tends to adopt these liberal values. Openness to emerging trends like gender identity and gender fluidity and gay marriage. 70% of these young people say that the government should do more to solve societal problems, so they're invested in society and they're looking for solutions. Some of the most important things, at least for this talk, are that anxiety and depression are rising in this generation. They're on track to be the best educated in US history. And surprisingly, to me at least, academics is what tops the list of pressures that are facing these young people. 61% of this generation say that they feel a lot of pressure to get good grades. And this just flips my experience as a Generation X, younger of the Generation X. You know, societal pressure was felt so much more than academic pressure for me. So, but for this generation, academics are topping the list of pressures and increasing that anxiety and potentially, you know, stress and depression. They overwhelmingly live in urban environments, and not surprisingly, technology plays a central role, but also a natural role in their lives. So just to give some context about, you know, who are our students? And then this, you know, what is contemplative teaching? What unifies contemplative practices? So these might be analytical exercises, asking students to examine a concept deeply, or just an opportunity to pause and to attend to what's arising. All of these practices, whatever they may be, are asking students to focus inward. So this is the first person focus. And this first person focus can create opportunities for greater connection and insight, as shown in the data that I just presented from my students, but they all focus on the present experience. So this first person perspective that's espoused by contemplative educators really stands in stark contrast to the dominance of what's called third person learning. So this is emblematic of traditional educational paradigms, including the scholarship of teaching and learning. So instead of making oneself center, it's, you know, learning biology or learning the botany or genetics or something else. But central to this model, the scholarship of teaching and learning model, is the role and the significance of reflective critique and critical self-reflection. And it said that that's what leads to transformative learning. So the defining characteristic of contemplative methods is student introspection and cultivation of attentiveness to themselves and to the relationship of which they are a part of, whether it be a plant that they're observing, or a peer that they're interacting with in class, or even a global issue like climate change. There's an educational theorist, Paulo Freire, and I like to quote him by saying, what the educator does in teaching is to make it possible for the students to become themselves. So what is contemplative teaching? So there was a keynote speaker invited to campus back in May as part of the pivotal pedagogy series put on by our Center for Teaching and Learning. His name is Kevin Gannon. And Kevin Gannon said, learning is both cognitive and affective. So contemplative teaching involves practices and activities in the classroom that connect both the mental, the cognitive dimension, and the non-cognitive, the affective dimension of the course material. So the affective is, you know, how does the material affect the student personally? And focusing on the affective domain of learning is a crucial element in the development of critical thinking skills, which has two dimensions. There's the cognitive and the affective disposition, such as the process of honestly facing one's own biases, prejudices, stereotypes, or sociocentric tendencies, and also cultivating an open-mindedness to divergent worldviews. So these are important components of critical thinking. The tree that you see in this picture illustrates some of the contemplative practices that are currently in use in academic settings. It's not a comprehensive list, but hopefully it gives you a sense of some of these activities that can be adapted to the classroom. Professor of pedagogy and also an ecologist, her name is Barbara Patterson, uses the pause, the stillness, the quieting of the mind on that first branch, the stillness branch, as an initial step in the contemplative practice. She says that by stretching open the spaces that might prematurely fill with conclusions, Contemplative pedagogies that begin with a pause make room for the discipline's best content. So one of the branches here, some of the branches are intrapersonal, so the focus is on stillness and moving within. Others are more interpersonal and relational. But the critical aspect of all of these practices is for the students to discover their own internal reaction without having to adopt any specific ideology. So it really gives the students a lot of sovereignty over their learning. And with that comes a whole other dimension of the student as you invite that into the classroom. One of the branches I'd like to explore is the storytelling branch. So relational. I'd like to tell you the story of my sabbatical. So I'll get back and give you some more details into the research and certain new opportunities in contemplative teaching and learning. But I'd like to first tell you the story of what brought me to the style of teaching. It was a really vulnerable fusion of my professional life with my personal life. And it began when, so there's sort of two threads that I'll tie together at the end. So some of you are aware that I've worked with the sustainability requirement, which is a general education requirement for all undergraduates at the University of Vermont. And the path to becoming a sustainability educator for me began in 2010 when I became a member of the Sustainability Faculty Fellows, which is a learning community hosted by the Center for Teaching and Learning. They've been going strong for 12 years. I was in the second cohort. And it was a really wonderful opportunity for me to meet other people throughout campus. So it was, across the disciplines, folks from all over the place at UVM came to learn about sustainability and how to infuse sustainability pedagogy into our classrooms. So it was a really nice experience of community. And about a year after the Faculty Fellows program ended, there was an email put out by Stephanie Kaza, who some of you probably remember. She was the former director of the environmental program in the Rubenstein School. And at that time, she was the vice president of the Faculty Senate. And the undergraduate Senate, the Student Government Association, had just passed a resolution for a sustainability requirement at UVM. So the students wanted a sustainability requirement. And Stephanie, being the vice president of the Faculty Senate, was responding to that. And she called together a group of faculty who were interested in working on building and creating the sustainability requirement. So I very naively, this was fall 2012, very naively raised my hand and volunteered to co-chair the committee, an ad hoc committee at that point of the Faculty Senate, to develop the sustainability requirement. I co-chaired it with Dean Wong, who many of you probably also know. Both Stephanie and Dean are both emeritus professors now. So I won't bore you with that, but I really liked the effort of the sustainability requirement, which was ultimately passed in 2015. So this work that I did with other faculty, graduate students, and undergraduate students was seminal in my development as a scholar of teaching and learning. We developed learning outcomes. We vetted them through the campus. I gave so many presentations to the Faculty Senate and responded to that. And UVM had a really strong multidisciplinary suite of sustainability courses already because of the faculty learning community, because of the Sustainability Faculty Fellows. So we got this formal approval from the Faculty Senate in fall 2015. So that's my professional life part, and I'll circle back to that and tie it together. But I did mention that there's an intersection with my personal life. So let me tell you that story first. So I was, as Dawn mentioned in the introduction, a graduate student here at UVM in 2003 to 2008 in Alison Brody's lab. So I was asking questions about plant ecology. And one of the things that was a touchstone in my life at that point, during all the transitions and all of the stresses of being a graduate student, was yoga. So I went to a Monday evening yoga class at Laughing River Yoga, right down the hill, right on the Winooski River. Emily Garrett was my teacher. And it just became a place of respite for me. So I really started to dive deep into my practice, and that studio became a home away from home. Emily made a CD for me when I got pregnant with my twins in 2010, so that I could practice at home, so I could listen to her and the course and practice at home. So it was really my fallback when things were getting really tough. And I wanted to learn more about the history and philosophy of yoga, and I wanted to deepen my practice. And I saw an opportunity to do so in 2015. So I joined a yoga teacher training program, which is a 200-hour program with Laughing River Yoga. My teacher, Emily, is right here in the middle. There she is. And Sophie Diloff. And it was a year-long program, and I was put right back into student shoes. And I was so overwhelmed after our first weekend. I tried to get out of it. I tried to back out. I got Emily on the phone and I said, I don't think I can do this. I'm a single parent. I am a faculty member at UVM. I've got so much on my plate. I don't think I can do this. And she talked me down and she said, you can do this, and don't give up and stick with it. And I did. And I never wanted to be a yoga teacher. But once I graduated, I had this new resource of training that I had to share. So I ended up bringing it into the classroom. And I used this arrival activity that I invited you all to participate in at the beginning of class. And it had a pretty profound effect on just the energy of the room. So everybody who teaches knows this, when students come into the room, they're bringing everything with them, meaning like the mental and emotional stuff. And they're not necessarily ready to learn just because they're in the room with you. So it brought this cohesiveness to the room that I had never experienced before. So I started introducing these practices in fall 2016. And I think everybody can remember what happened in November 2016 with the presidential election. So this also was a very vulnerable time for a lot of folks. And I kept with it, even with the vulnerability, even when my emotions started to arise as I was guiding the practice, particularly the morning after the presidential election is what I'm thinking about. I became more human. I didn't put on the mask of the professor when I walked into the room. I was just me, and I just showed up. And the students really responded to that. And it gained some media attention. WCAX interviewed me and two of my students, and I won't show you the clip, but the interviews with the two students was just so profoundly enlightening. I had no idea that it was really affecting these students so positively. So I kept it up. And to bring us back to the sustainability thread, my colleague in the audience, Tom Hudspeth, and I had multiple conversations as I started to consider a sabbatical. So I became a senior lecturer, I think in 2015, and I was eligible for sabbatical. And I wasn't sure what to do. My position here at UVM is teaching rather than research. I didn't want to try to dive back into the ecology research that I had done as a PhD student. And I really started to, have conversations about, what do I want to do? So so I was talking with Tom, and he said, I have a colleague, her name's Jean McGregor, and she lives she's now emeritus professor, but she was a professor at Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. And she was going to be at a conference that I was presenting at. So in 2017, I presented at a conference of the association, what is it, ASHE? So it's the Association of the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. So I went there to present the work that Dean Wong and I had published about how to integrate sustainability learning outcomes into a university curriculum. So we used our experience at UVM as a case study. And I was going to present that work, and Tom said, Jean's going to be there, and just make sure that you connect with her. So I got on the plane and I headed south, and I was exploring different workshop options at the conference. And I was most excited to attend a workshop one early morning called Using Contemplative Practices to Cultivate Resilient Students and Socio-Ecological Systems. And it was presented by a woman named Lissy Gorelnak, who's an assistant professor at Michigan State. And there's another woman there too, and I apologize, I forget her name. But I walked into this workshop. It was the first of the day. And here we were being guided through stillness practices. And we walked into the room and we were asked to take a leaf from the table. And we were guided through a walking meditation about the carbon cycle and our sort of contribution to the carbon cycle, just with our breath. And by the end, I felt refreshed and I felt enlivened. And I thought, I didn't know this was a thing. I thought I was just sort of doing my thing in my classroom. And I realized that contemplative practices in higher education is a thing. And at that workshop, sitting at the table across from me was Jean McGregor, Tom Hudd's best friend, who said, and colleague, who he said I needed to connect with, along with Holly Hughes. Little did I know at that time that Jean and her colleagues Marie Eaton and Holly Hughes had written a book called Contemplative Approaches to Sustainability in Higher Education. And so this really launched me into a space that I didn't know existed. And I committed to taking a sabbatical year to develop a faculty learning community around contemplative pedagogy, as Jean had done on the West Coast. So Jean is also the former director of the curriculum for the bioregion, which is a group of faculty on the West Coast.
No, that's
Charlotte, hi.
Okay, what's her?
I'm going to mute you. Okay, thank you. So Jean had been facilitating a faculty learning community in the Puget Sound area from faculty from various institutions out in Western Washington for about 10 years. So I had a lot to learn about developing a faculty learning community. I had a lot to learn about how to infuse contemplative pedagogy into the curriculum. So with that, I went and asked Jean if she would be my sabbatical host. And she said, of course. And she invited me to their 2019 retreat on Whidbey Island, which is in the Puget Sound. And I'll circle back to that in a second. But the next part of my story is about my development of the sabbatical proposal. So there is an association for contemplative mind and society dealing specifically with contemplative pedagogy in higher education. And they have summer sessions that they host at Smith College down in Massachusetts. And I attended the 14th annual summer session on contemplative learning in higher education and worked with Dr. Camila Majid, who's currently on the West Coast. She's at the University of California at Monterey Bay. And she really helped me develop this proposal, my sabbatical proposal, to develop a contemplative faculty learning community at the University of Vermont. So I left with a draft of a sabbatical project proposal to develop this faculty learning community in collaboration with the Center for Teaching and Learning at UVM. I submitted it in the fall of 2018, and then in February 2019, I found that it was accepted. So my sabbatical began in the fall of 2019, and the first thing I did was I very serendipitously found a workshop called Contemplative Practice in Higher Education, which was just about five hours away at the Omega Institute in New York, in Rhinebeck, New York. And I attended that weekend workshop, and here's Mirabai Bush. Mirabai Bush wrote a book with her colleague Daniel Barbazat of the same name, Contemplative Practice in Higher Education. And it's really it has been sort of the text of contemplative practices in higher education. Mirabai is also the founder, the founding director and senior fellow for Contemplative Mind and Society. So she's like the superstar. So I was so happy to learn from Mirabai. Next to Mirabai is Rhonda McGee, she's a law professor at the University of San Francisco. And she wrote a wonderful book that just came out last year called The Inner Work of Racial Justice around contemplative pedagogy. This is Vijay Kanagala, who some of you might remember. He was at the University of Vermont in the education department. He's now at Salem State University, but he's an associate professor of secondary and higher education. And then last year's Dr. Angel Acosta. And at that time, Angel was finishing up his doctoral program at Columbia University. And he had a collaboration with the Teachers College in New York City for this amazing project that I highly recommend looking up. It's called 400 Years of Inequality. And he led this very profound contemplative exercise around this 400 years of history that we have in the United States around inequality. It was just a really profound weekend for me, and I learned a lot from that workshop. Mirabai asked what I was interested in. I told her about the faculty learning community, and she pulled me inside and she said, "You will meet the most wonderful people doing this work. It's what I love most about this work." And she's right on point. Absolutely true. So after that, I hopped on a plane and I headed west out to Washington State, and I landed in Seattle, and I landed on this campus. The University of Washington actually looks like this. Mount Rainier is just boom, it's like right in the center. Such a beautiful campus. I was so happy to be there. Jean McGregor facilitated so many relationships on my behalf, one of which was with Dr. Karen Litvin, who's a political scientist at University of Washington in Seattle. And Karen's been doing contemplative pedagogy in her large courses for over 20 years. So there's a lot to learn from Karen and her approach, especially in large courses, which I teach as well at UVM. Karen is also a member of the faculty at UW who is working on a similar initiative to get a university-wide sustainability requirement. So I was able to reciprocate and host a seminar on sustainability across the curriculum using UVM as a case study. And the icing on the cake was that Dean Wong was able to attend because he is now retired and he's in West Seattle. So he was able to attend, and we had a nice dinner after and got a chance to catch up. So that was really lovely. After my time at UW, I hopped on a train and I headed north to Bellingham, Washington. And I met with lots of folks there, but most namely Dr. Grace Wong, who's a professor of environmental studies. She's also the department chair. And Dr. Marie Eaton, who is one of the co-authors of the book that I presented earlier that Jean McGregor wrote. She's also professor, now emeritus, professor of humanities and education. And they're both at Western Washington University. So I learned a lot from these folks, and I was able to really reciprocate, which was lovely for me, just reciprocate in sharing knowledge of our sustainability requirement at UVM. After my trip to Bellingham, which is way up north, almost on the Canada border, I headed back down south to Tacoma, had a wonderful potluck lunch with Jean, and we were at this house with these adorable little dogs. So here's a picture of Jean with one of these adorable little puppies that graced our presence for an afternoon. And I again met more colleagues and friends who were engaging in contemplative pedagogy. And then Jean took me to her home in Olympia, Washington after that. And on the way, we stopped at a creek and we saw the salmon running upstream. And our house is just perched at the top of this peak. This picture is not from Jean's house, but just to give you a sense of the landscape there, it's a beautiful landscape. So all during this time that I was gallivanting around Western Washington, my kids were with my mom, and my mom's in the audience. So I'm glad my mom was able to be here. So my mom flew out with the kids, with my sons, Ian and Heath, and we spent a nice time in Seattle. We explored Seattle a little bit. We went to the Seattle Center, and we went to my mom's favorite artist, the Dale Chihuly, who's a glass artist. The Chihuly Garden and Glass Museum, which just blew my mind. These pieces of art are just fascinating. It's amazing, this work that he does. We visited the Space Needle. We went to the aquarium. We just had really sweet family time in Seattle. Then my mom flew back to Ohio, and the kids and I headed west to the Olympic Peninsula, which is where the temperate rainforest biome is in the United States. And here's the big leaf maples Acer macrophyllum in the temperate rainforest, and they're just full of epiphytic mosses and ferns and lycophytes, and just so beautiful and such a different landscape from here. We love mountains, so we went up to Hurricane Ridge, taller than any mountain in Vermont, and just had a wonderful hike and a nice time together. Then we headed down south and checked out the Pacific Ocean, in tidal pools, ended up on the coast of Oregon State, and then we headed east inland to Portland, and we saw friends and we saw family, and we ended up back in Ohio to celebrate the holiday, the Thanksgiving holiday, and my son's 9th birthday with their cousin and with family. So we had a wonderful time. We had a really great time. We had a blast. And we returned back to Vermont in 2019, in December 2019, and we celebrated the holidays and celebrated the new year. And we all know what happened next, right? So COVID. And I'd like to just take a pause at this point and take a moment to notice what we've been going through for the last year, over a year. And I'd like to acknowledge the 538,000 Americans that have died from COVID, and the hundreds of thousands of more family members and friends of those people who have died. We're still averaging over 1,000 deaths per day, and we have a current surge on campus. So emotions are really pervasive right now in our classrooms, and courage is really needed to name and legitimize and witness responses to this. We're collectively navigating really unprecedented times. We're all facing new challenges. There's so much uncertainty. I just would like to read a short bit from the Contemplative Approaches to Sustainability in Higher Education from the chapter that Marie Eaton wrote. Marie is a palliative care professor, and her chapter is called Navigating Anger, Fear, Grief, and Despair. And it was one of the most poignant chapters for me. And this is a quote from Joanna Macy. And Joanna Macy reminds us that as a society, we're caught between a sense of impending apocalypse and the fear of acknowledging it. In this caught place, our responses are blocked and confused. The result is 3 widespread psychological strategies: disbelief, denial, and a double life, in which we attempt to live as though nothing has happened when we know it has. So with this grief that we're dealing with right now, this is my colleague at University of Washington in Bothell, Dr. Jennifer Atkinson. She's working with others around the emotions of climate change. So she's a professor of environmental humanities, and she's really kind of diving deep with offering seminars for students around how to navigate emotions and move through strong emotions. And the first step is recognizing the truth, which is what I really meant to do just then. Recognize where we're at, and then talk about it, and then take rest. She recommends rest in nature, and then move into empowered action. She's got a wonderful podcast called Facing It. So if any of this is resonating with you, I highly recommend looking her up. She's doing wonderful work. So circling back to this idea of why would we want to use contemplative teaching and learning, students are arriving to college with big questions like, what are my most deeply felt values? And do I have a mission or purpose in life? What kind of person do I want to become? What sort of world do I want to create? So these topics are precisely relevant now, especially as young people come of age during a pandemic. And here we are as educators on the front lines as we engage with young people in shaping our collective future. So we can develop skills like collaboration and initiative and resilience and empathy. Most of us are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, from the basics of recalling facts and basic concepts all the way up to creating and producing original work. So this really speaks to the cognitive dimension of learning. But remember that there is an affective domain as well. So there are feelings and emotions, and whether or not we invite them in, they're there. So there's another way to think about this. You know, while theoretical attention to the whole student as a learner is well substantiated in higher education and the scholarship of teaching and learning, a lot of these classroom activities are only partially understood or underdeveloped or even inadequately engaged. So there's another taxonomy that we can use, and this is Krathwell's taxonomy. It provides a structure from which teachers can devise sequential series of activities to develop a student's personal relationship and value system. So just look at the base there, receiving, and think about yourself and think about our culture at large. You know, are we willing to pay attention? Are we willing to listen with respect? Now, I would argue no. You know, are we able to actively respond and participate? You know, are we placing values on behaviors and people and situations and ideas? Are we able to prioritize those values, resolve any conflicts between them? And then finally, are we able to integrate this and internalize this value system and use it to guide our behavior? So there's this affective domain overlaid with Bloom's taxonomy. We're able to touch on both the cognitive and the non-cognitive dimensions of learning. So does it work? So what is some of the research here on contemplative and mindfulness research? Most of the research has been focused on the neurological and psychological and physiological effects of mindfulness. And there's been many benefits have been shown. So contemplative and mindfulness-based activities in college students have been shown to increase a student's attention, which every teacher in the room likes to hear. Also improves cognition and cognitive flexibility. Remember, Gen Z, mostly affected by stress and anxiety, so it's been shown to decrease stress and decrease anxiety. But how can we assess the impact of contemplative teaching practices on students, on their learning? So there's a researcher, her name is Willoughby Britton. She's at Brown University, and Brown University has a contemplative studies initiative that's committed to contemplative scientific research through its clinical and affective neuroscience laboratory, the CLAN lab. And Britton's research is one of the first, among the first, to demonstrate the integration of intellectual conceptions with the dual quality of mindfulness training in a college student population compared to a control group. So for the past several years, Britton's been assessing the effects of this first-person pedagogy combined with mindfulness training on a group of students, and she's found increases in attention capacities, like the previous research that I presented also found. Also improvements in body awareness. She, again, like other studies have found, reduction in anxiety and depression. And she found an increase in compassion for self and others. And there's a little bit of a caveat with that last point. Women benefit significantly more than men in this last part, this increase in compassion for self and others. So many questions remain. There's a really great need for an intersection of the scholarship of teaching and learning model with contemplative pedagogy. So most of the literature right now focuses on the practices, but not on the effect on student learning. So some of the main points, especially those top two, you know, is contemplative pedagogy, is there academic integrity there? Is there academic rigor? I just have to quote my teacher, Angel Acosta from the Omega Institute, and we've stayed in touch since then. He talks about that academic rigor, and he asks us to dwell on the word rigor, and rigor means, you know, rigor mortis, like stasis, tight. And he says, what if we change that word rigor to vigor? So he likes using academic vigor rather than rigor, and I like that too. Also, assessment of learning. So I see UVM can play a key role in filling the gaps in contemplative research with our new faculty learning community. So what is a faculty learning community? So this is a community that is a cross-disciplinary group of faculty who engage in an extended, typically year-long planned program to enhance teaching and learning, which incorporates frequent activities to facilitate learning, development, and community building. And just this morning, we had our 8th meeting of UVM's newly founded Contemplative Faculty Learning Community. These are the aims of our community. So we aim to train faculty how to effectively integrate contemplative teaching into existing courses and also new courses. So every faculty member in the cohort came in with a course that they're either building or thinking about revamping with contemplative practices interfused within. We hope to foster the development of concrete models of implementation and assessment of these practices across the disciplines. We have faculty from 5 colleges and 9 departments at the university, so we really do have a nice representation across the disciplines from engineering to art. And lastly, and I think almost most importantly, we aim to support a deepening of the personal contemplative practice by providing structure, by providing guidance, and providing encouragement. So every time we meet, we practice together. And just like you wouldn't walk into a classroom to teach a botany course without having studied botany, you wouldn't walk into a course to teach contemplative practices if you've never done them yourself. So it's a really important point. A lot of these practices can bring you into a place of discomfort. So it's important to understand what comes up when you do this so that you can mentor students as they navigate this. So this is just a bit of the activities and what we do. We're using Mirabai Bush and Daniel Barbazat's book, Contemplative Practices in Higher Education, as a framework with other readings and discussions coming in. We just had a student-led practice that we have at UVM Mindfulness. There's a mindfulness facilitator program, training program for students. So it was really a rich experience this morning to invite 2 students in to lead our practice and tell us a bit about their experience. How can we use contemplative practices in higher education? There's lots of ways to do it. One thing I would like to talk about for the next couple minutes is how to directly integrate with the subject matter. I'd like to use an example from a chemistry course. So this is Dr. Michelle Frankel. She's a professor of chemistry at Bryn Mawr in Pennsylvania. And a question some of you might be asking is, does this have a place in science courses? I'm not sure how this would fit in. So I want to give you a sense of what she does. So Frankel has a beholding practice, which is one of the branches on the tree of contemplative practices. Just like you would stand in front of a piece of art, and behold it for several minutes and just see what kind of comes up as you sit with it and look at it. She actually does that with graphs. Some of you probably know what you're looking at here. Some of you might not. But what I'd like you, what could be an activity in a course, a botany course or biology course, is to ask students to quietly spend 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes just looking at an image that they haven't seen before. So I'll ask if you can do that, even if you know what you're looking at and you're putting labels on things, see if you can not do that and see this with fresh eyes. So for 3 to 5 minutes, the students just behold the image, and then she turns it off, and for 1 to 2 minutes, she just asks them to draw, sketch what they saw. And then she turns it and asks students to tell her, what did you notice about the graph? So some students might point out that the cells in the center are bigger and they're hollow and they look different from the other cells, or students will pick up on these things. So then she selects these ideas from the list, the ones that were mentioned most frequently, and then she proceeds with lecture. So those cells in the center with that very characteristic star shape, that's a eudicot root. Those are cells of the xylem. They're hollow because they transport water. So they're lignified, so the cell walls are thicker. So you start with the intuition and then you move into the analytical. And I think that can be a really powerful thing for students who haven't seen this before. One thing about contemplative practices is that there are some safety measures and things that I always tend to follow. So there's a researcher named Beth Barilla. She wrote an anti-oppression book around using contemplative pedagogy and anti-oppression pedagogy. And she introduces 5 principles when practicing mindfulness. The first is just to assume that someone in the room has suffered trauma, and then behave with the requisite compassion and calm. Prepare students for possible reactions beforehand. So describe what you're doing and why you're doing it. Share your intention. Always offer the option of opting out, so they should be voluntary. Provide support resources. Hold the space non-judgmentally with compassion and kindness, so you can stay grounded and meet student reactions wherever they are, and just really, limit the frequency and kind and length of these practices, and just give students the sovereignty to stop whenever they need to. There are lots of resources available. So as I mentioned, right here at UVM, we have our Center for Teaching and Learning. We have a contemplative faculty learning community. We'll be recruiting for next year, 2021, 2022, in late spring. So please consider applying. We also have an email listserv, contemplative faculty at UVM. Graduate students are welcome to join as well. I am a CTL faculty associate, so you can request a faculty consultation with me. We can meet one-on-one to talk about this and how it might fit into your class. And also the Contemplative Mind and Society has a wonderful resources tab on their website if you just want to explore some other resources. So I'm going to zoom through. I don't have time to talk about this, but I just want to thank all of my contemplative teachers, so many wonderful people. I couldn't even fit everybody on the slide. Thank you for all the wisdom that you've passed on to me and all the inspiration and just the recognition that this is something that can be done and the time is now. Also, thank you to the Center for Teaching and Learning, the director, Andy Murray Close, and especially the assistant director, Wendy Berry-Barenbach, who's helped me build this, and also the coordinating committee, Dr. Adrian Novakiev, Zach Eastbalanda, and Karen Nordstrom for helping build this first faculty learning community, contemplative faculty. And just lastly, thank you to the plant biology department for your support, particularly Dave Barrington, who figured out how to go along without me in my absence for a year. Jean McGregor, who's a wonderful sabbatical host, and my mom. I couldn't have done this without my mom and her help. So thank you. And I'd like to end with just extension of gratitude. And this is a mindfulness, loving kindness meditation called Metta meditation from the Buddhist tradition. May you be happy. May you be free. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be free. May you be safe. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Hi, Laura. This is Terry. Can I say something?
Of course, please.
Hi. Well, I loved hearing your story. Thank you. That was lovely. And also it brought back memories for me because I used to live on Whidbey Island.
Oh, gosh. Lucky you.
Yeah. But it reminded me of some of the times in the forest with my class where sometimes I'll just have the students sit down and I'll tell them just to stop and look around and realize that this ecosystem was transformed by the storm that rolled through last week.
Yeah.
And you'll see the wind throws and the light and the upturned earth and the plucked soil off of the bedrock. And it's a very nice thing to just get people to stop the typical academic approach and just absorb the environment. So I think we might do a lot of this type of thing without realizing it, but I do find it's very almost meditative, and the students really respond well to that. So I'm very interested in learning more about your program. So I'll probably touch bases with you down the road. But thank you for a nice talk.
Sure. Thanks, Terry. Please do. I'd love to talk more. Yeah, and as Terry just mentioned, I mean, Terry, you're doing it. You know, I have conversations with people like Susan Marie Harrington, who's the writing and the disciplines director. She does free writing, reflective writing in her course. That's contemplative pedagogy. You know, you might not call it that, but anytime we're asking students to pause and reflect and giving them space to do that in a structured way, we're doing it. So yeah. Thank you, Kathy, for your comment.
Hi, Laura. Can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, we haven't had a chance to meet yet, but I'm a graduate student in Dave and Michael Sundhu's lab.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say thank you so much. I thought that was a really great talk, and it touched on so many things that are so current and I feel like so appropriate. I have a question regarding what to do with say the 5% that, weren't, vibing with kind of the mindfulness space that you were creating. And I ask because, I taught plant systematics, the lab course with Morgan right at the beginning of last semester, right coming quick out of the pandemic. And, it just didn't feel right to start the course without just acknowledging what was happening in the world and in Vermont and elsewhere. And I actually got this from Steve and Melissa Pespini, the ecological genomics. I remember just so clearly at one point the pandemic was starting to heat up and they asked us, just share something that you're excited about and something that is stressing you out. And it was so nice to hear that, our stresses were all mutually shared, and there were some things that were specific to individuals. But so we tried to echo that practice at the beginning of our course, and it was like really obvious who was not into it. I would say that the ratios that you got were almost identical to us. I would say, more than 3/4 were super excited to share and like to hear other people, but it was kind of obvious who did not and kind of thought it was a waste of time. So I was wondering, how do you approach that kind of situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Bertrand. So you're always going to have, in my experience, a small percentage of people who opt out, who don't want to do it, or who are just sort of like, there's something there that there's too much discomfort, or it's too much out of their comfort zone, or whatever their reasons are. So I will tend to proceed as normal because I know that the majority of the class is getting a positive experience from it. And what I'll try to do if it persists is engage those students in a private conversation to just get a sense of like, if they want to talk, again, it's all optional. Nobody has to do this, So making it optional, I think, is very powerful, and constantly reminding them that this is an invitation. You can do this, giving them options. You don't have to do any of this. But if they're making it known, which it sounds like they might have done in your class, or maybe it was just a small class. If they're making it known, I would encourage you to just start a conversation with them in a non-judgmental way, just in a way that you just want to understand their experience. So I think that opening a conversation with the intent of understanding their experience is where I would start, and just go from there.
Nice. Awesome. That sounds like a really good strategy. Yeah, and just to be clear, it wasn't more like they didn't like it. It was more like, they could tell, like, we want to talk about the plants. We want to get to the plants, know, and that was also exciting, so I didn't want to, dampen anybody's enthusiasm, but it felt like something that was really good for the group as a whole. So I was glad that we did it.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that you did that, and I'm just so glad to hear these little tidbits from various courses. We're all doing this. It's a community building. It's an opportunity to pause and notice. That's really all. The students just really tend to resonate with that. At least the majority of them do. So thanks for doing that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Steve, go ahead.
Thanks, Laura. I thought about this a lot with regard to B Corps 101, which you know very well, having taught it for so many years too. And in particular, right before you hand out the exam, the hourly midterm exam, you can just feel that anxiety in the room.
Yeah.
And I feel like over the years, anxiety levels in general have really grown in our students and ourselves. But definitely that pre-exam or even during the exam anxiety is just so high, and I think it can really get in the way, I think, for a lot of students, being able to demonstrate, what they otherwise know in a calm environment. So I've thought about, being a total amateur at this stuff and having really benefited from your seminar talk just now, but I've thought about in the past doing some sort of mindfulness before the exam, but I'm not confident enough that I could pull it off in a way that wouldn't actually maybe throw people off their game, which is exactly the opposite of what I want to do. So do you have any advice for sort of a newbie about how to approach that? Maybe the idea is just not to do it only on exam day, but to sort of practice it ahead of time so it doesn't kind of come out of the blue. But that's when I see they really need it.
Yeah, I agree. I remember, and I still experience that to a lesser degree in B Corps 11 and B Corps 12. So a couple things are coming to mind. The first is that, as I mentioned at the beginning, I do these arrival activities every time we meet. So the students get used to it and they can practice it on their own. Before an exam, when we were in person, excuse me, before an exam, I would prompt them to start. I wouldn't lead it. I would say, you know what to do. Try to take a few deep breaths to calm yourself down. During the arrival activities, sometimes I'll, read about how the sympathetic nervous system shifts to the parasympathetic mode when we do this deep breathing. So I'll sort of confirm it with some neuroscience. But I just prompt them to do it themselves, because I think if you're taking time out of, even if it's just a minute of time, how the students need every minute sometimes of the test. So I can see how it could maybe increase anxiety and do the opposite of what you intend. The other thing is that we have amazing undergraduates who are trained in mindfulness, who can come into the class and lead activities for you. That's what they do. So I'd be happy to link you up with the student group. And I think eventually, if you would like to do it on your own, it might just be helpful to see how others do it a little bit. And also that personal practice, if you don't have a mindfulness practice of your own, it's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel weird. You're going to feel uncomfortable doing it, rightly so. So I would say if you're interested in this, start your own practice. And in the meantime, use all the resources that we have on campus to supplement the student experience in genetics.
Yeah, good advice. And absolutely, I'd love it if you could share that contact info for the student group on campus.
Yeah, I'll be in touch. Definitely.
Laura, it's really, really interesting and thought-provoking. I have so many ideas going through my head right now.
Good.
One is actually related to Steve's comment. It was a study I read a number of years ago where it was some large university that had many, many physics classes, many, many sections. And they had students at the beginning either just take a few minutes to do nothing, take a few minutes to write something random, or take a few minutes to write something about what they do well. And it could even be like, I am a good friend. And what was interesting was, and I see now that this is that sort of contemplative, like getting the students to self-reflect a little bit and do that little even though it's just a couple minutes. And what was interesting is they did this over a couple of years, many, many sections, and those sections had increased grades on the exam, same exam across the sections. And they particularly noticed an increase in female students and in students of color. So just like you, that little extra affirmation, like Laura, you end with, may you be happy, may you be free, may you be safe. This is kind of like saying, I'm good at this. I'm good at, I may not be good at physics, but I'm really good at this other thing. And then you enter with this mindset of, I am good at things. So I don't know, that it was the first time I've managed to place that into this idea of contemplative learning. The other thought is thinking about that, both about the tree that you had with the many branches, seeing the different parts there. This year, as you know, since you've been in some of my classes, I'm trying to include more listening to other voices and then having them write a reflection. And so I was really interested to see that triangle you had where you had the basically the listening and then reflecting. And so I was very interested to see and to think about, like, what are the next steps and how can, I think the third step might be happening to them in their heads, but I don't know. But then how do you do things that facilitate those subsequent steps?
Right.
So I might love to chat with you about that. Like, how can you take it one step further?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be very clear and honest with everybody listening, like, I'm stretching my boundaries as well. So I am no expert in this, but I really think it's important. So I'm learning so much from other people. So I'd be happy to navigate some of, like, what could you do? What have you done? Where could you take it? Yeah, absolutely. Please be in touch.
And when I start those things in class, I said, this is the first time I'm doing it.
Yeah.
This is why I'm doing it. And I'm, thank you for trying it.
Thank you for listening and for sharing that story of the students that had that reflective activity. That's pretty profound, just taking minutes.
Very profound. And they said they just took, I think they gave them like just a few minutes at the beginning.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah.
Laura, Terry again. One thing that I've kind of gathered through listening is that there may be differences in different groups of people with how well they respond to this approach or subscribe to it. I hear that there may be gender differences.
Yeah.
What Jean said, even some people of color, or I forget the expression you used, Jean, but what can you say something about that? Like this is probably saying something about human nature, the capacity or willingness or receptivity of different groups of people to incorporate this or benefit from this approach. Can you comment on it?
Yeah, unfortunately I can't point to any causal effect, but this is something that is coming out in the literature. And I think I mentioned Willoughby Britton at Brown University. They're looking at this because that came out of their initial study, thinking it was the gender differences. It wasn't the BIPOC population, but yeah, with the gender, I can only speculate, which I'm going to hesitate to do. I can only speculate on why that might be, but it is interesting how we're seeing these trends, and it's certainly somewhere to look more closely. Potentially, it has something to do with more marginalized groups of people, whether it's gender or race, culture. I'm not sure, but it's certainly something that's falling out of the data. And it's something that we could look at too in our classes as we start to, have years of the cohorts of faculty that go through this program. We hope to gain a lot of information about what they're doing, the program development from the faculty side, but also the student learning and student, the affective domain of the student. So it's sort of we're navigating some new terrain here, but I know a lot of eyes are focused on this. So I would say stay tuned. I don't really know exactly what those differences are being caused by, but we're definitely seeing them.
I think one demographic might be interesting to look at would be the students first, whatever the designation is, first-time students and their family. I forget the
first-generation students.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because they may have less support, perhaps on aggregate from their homes, and often those students require a little more guidance on aggregate. Anyway, very thought-provoking. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I am a first-generation college student, I should mention.
Yeah, I think I am, although my dad. Yeah.
It is almost 5:30.
Yeah, we went over.
It's lots to think about and lots of discussion. And fortunately, you're around here, so we can continue to talk to you and ask you questions. And so,
yes, you can.
Let's thank Laura once again, and I'm sure we will pepper you with more questions.
Absolutely, I welcome them. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate it.
Woo!
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Laura.
Thank you. Oh, thanks, everybody. Mom?
Yeah, that's great. You're still sharing your screen.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I should have told you that earlier.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm going to talk to people in real time and see the thing.